Okay. Hi, Alyssa. Thanks for joining us. All right. Well, we're going to get started. Thank you, everyone who came on time. We know people will be coming in, but we want to, one thing at No Shame on You is we always start on time, and want to honor that. So, welcome to today's session. My name is Wendy Singer, and I am Executive Director for No Shame on You. And on behalf of our Board of Directors, our volunteers, our staff, I warmly welcome you to today's program. It's called Camp Ready, Preparing Your Child and Yourself for the Emotional Journey of Camp. And this is part of a Major Mind series where we offer once a month sessions on different mental health and wellness topics, with all kinds of different things. So thanks for coming. And now that if it's your first time, you'll receive information about our work. No Shame on You is dedicated to reshaping attitudes about mental health, elevating conversations, and disarming stigma. We support young people as well as those who support them with tools to stand, talk about, and respond to mental health challenges. And we fulfill our missions with a comprehensive outreach programs, workshops, team programs, free resources, and a robust online presence of over about just about 120,000 social media followers, Facebook being our largest. So if you haven't followed us yet, please do because you'll get great information. We partner with organizations and experts throughout the Chicagoland area and beyond and across the country and are recognized for our inclusive, consistent, and responsive programming for people of all ages. I do want to express our gratitude to our sponsors displayed in the pre-roll slideshow beforehand. And before I introduce our speakers today, we will hold a Q&A session at the conclusion of the program. Please submit your questions directly to me, Wendy Singer, NSOU, No Shame on You, and we will address as many questions as time permits. It's now my honor and pleasure to introduce today's speakers. One of them is my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Anat Geva, who is No Shame on You's Director of Strategic Initiatives. Anat is deeply committed to promoting mental health awareness and destigmatizing mental health challenges. At No Shame on You, she oversees all the content development with the expansion and implementation of new mental health programs and initiatives, amongst a million other things. She has served as a lay leader for several organizations, including a Midwest overnight camp. So she's an overnight camp fan, just like the rest of us. Known for her creativity, analytical skill, love of collaboration, Anat is committed to lifelong learning, graduating from Northwestern University Pritzker School of Law with a JD and earning a PhD in cognitive and clinical psychology from the University of Michigan. And she also did her undergraduate work at University of Toronto. Next, I want to introduce another dear friend, Jamie Sirkin. Jamie is the founder of an organization called Consulting Up. She's a retired camp director and licensed clinical social worker with over 25 years of experience in the camp world and more than a decade in public health. She's passionate about creating emotionally and physically safe spaces for kids, staff, families, and brings some more than enough expertise in camper recruitment, staff training, risk management, and mental health support to go around. And then the fun fact that we want to conclude is Jamie and myself. I mentioned I'm executive director of No Shame on You, but I also was a camp director for 18 years. And Jamie and I went to undergraduate school at Indiana University back in the 90s, where we signed up for a class on how to be a camp director. We had the dream of becoming a camp director one day. And we did it. We both became camp directors. And here we are reuniting after our camp director careers, talking about camp and well-being, which is our favorite thing. So, welcome, guys. Take it away. Thank you for being here. And let's do it.
We're here to talk about camp today. And camp, it's not just fun and games, it's also one of the most powerful developmental settings in a young person's life. And so today we want to talk about what are the emotional responses that a child might experience at camp, but also what the parents might experience. We want to identify and understand what common challenges are at camp, and really sort of want to talk a little bit more, really want to clarify what camps do, what they can do, what we want them to do to support kids, and what parents can actually also do to help support their kids at camp. And ultimately, what the most important thing actually for a successful camp experience for your child is also having a good parent camp partnership. That's usually what underlies kids thriving at camp. The thing about camp, right, is it's something deeper, right? When we send our kids into camp, we're sending them to a new environment without us. And when we talk about is what that does to them and what that does to us, right? Camp is exciting, it's joyful, it's expansive. It can be the most amazing experience. And at the same time, it is a separation. When a child leaves for camp, right, they're leaving their predictable routines at home. They no longer have the immediate reassurance of family and friends and family comforts. They have established coping tools that work at home that now are going to be put to the test at camp. And they're leaving an environment where they're most regulated. And even confident, independent children will experience a nervous system shift when they head off to camp. And actually, one of the things we know is that when people experience something new, before the brain even something new like separation, what ends up happening is that basically the brain first understands it as stress, and only then are we able to interpret what is actually happening. So it's because your brain is adapting to something new. We're going to talk about Ethan, our made up camper today throughout. And I want to introduce you to Ethan. Ethan is a capable, independent kid. He's super excited about going to camp. When his parents tell him he's going to camp next summer, he starts counting down the days, and he tells his parents, don't worry. And then his parents drop him off and at camp, and he waves confidently. In fact, they're kind of a little bit upset about how quickly he's taking off without looking back. And they drive away and are like, all right, he is so ready. Um, and on day 3, Ethan shows up at the nurse's office and he has a stomach ache. And it turns out that he didn't join the cabin at free play for basketball, and he didn't go to free swim because he wasn't feeling well. And the nurse does an examination and he says to Ethan, I can't find anything wrong with you. Or I can't find anything medically wrong with you, excuse me. And what we have to understand is that Ethan is having a completely human response here to a completely new emotional environment, right? At camp, suddenly Ethan doesn't have the supports that he's used to. He has, camp is intense. There's friendships and social roles that get reshuffled really quickly, especially at the beginning. He's figuring out, where do I fit in? Who are my people? And independence isn't private, right? Like anything you try that's new, there's like a crowd, you're doing it in front of others, and that can feel very exposing and very stressful. But the issue here isn't stress, right? Stress showing up is not the problem. The real question is, when stress shows up, does camp notice it? Does camp support it? Does camp help the child move through it? Or does a kid like Ethan just get left alone inside that stress? Jamie, all you.
Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be doing this and working with Anat and Wendy on this. So I get to talk a little bit about the system of camp, the ecosystem that is camp. And I think a lot of people look at camp and they say, I am sending my child to camp because I need daycare or childcare for the summer, whether it's a day camp or an overnight camp. And camp is so much more than childcare. It's so much more than babysitting. It's so much more than a collection of just recreational activities. It is a whole system of structure. It has structured values. It has predictability of educational systems in place and recreational systems and relationships and expectations and support systems, really amazing things that are all happening within this system of camp. And it's also compressed, right? And when it's all compressed, there are challenges that are arising. So we look at cabin life, that social density of having 10, 12, 15 kids share a space together where they're negotiating things. And there's no space for independence. If you need that quiet space by yourself, how are you finding that? That's happening. There's no escape there. That friendship negotiation is happening all the time. It's constant. It's constant work, that socialization. Um, there's real fatigue that happens at camp. It's hot, the days are long, the activities are long, and that reduces your emotional bandwidth. And so we want to think about that within our structure as well. And there's more social comparison. You start to notice things with your peers, the things that you have in common, the things that you don't have in common, how you're being excluded or included. And just regular, how do you have a conversation with somebody over the lunch table becomes something that you have to work at multiple times during the day. So thinking about that structure at camp, the counselors, and the leadership chain of command. Who is there monitoring your children? The people that are in the trenches with them, and then their support system. Is there a medical and healthcare system that is tracking additional needs? Is there a documentation system? How are counselors observing your shifts in mood? How are we observing and taking note of the visit to the health center that's a tummy ache, that's a headache, or that appear at the same time every day? And going back to Ethan, our camper, who and not mentioned, we're going to sort of keep bringing up throughout this presentation. If Ethan doesn't participate in an activity, he chooses not to play basketball during free time, or he chooses not to go to swimming and swim. Instead of looking at the activity as being the issue, looking at, is somebody noticing? Is somebody noticing that Ethan isn't participating? How are they engaging him? How are they intervening? What proactive steps are being put into place? Um, moving along, thinking about mental health as a core part of camp, not just as an add-on. It's no longer a nice to have option. It's a essential option. And I think we could even swap out mental health for well-being, which Wendy and Anat mentioned earlier in this session, thinking about well-being of our campers as a whole. How are we caring for them? We would never, as parents, send our child to a camp that didn't have lifeguards, that didn't have an emergency response plan, that didn't have an allergy protocol. So how are we making sure that we have all these additional needs that we want for our children to make sure that they're feeling emotionally safe in the same way that they're feeling physically safe? And making sure that we are having that transparency and trust with families from the very beginning, being able on that onboarding phase when parents are enrolling, they deserve that clarity to be able to have real conversations with them about the well-being support systems that are at camp. Ask the questions so that you know what kind of support the campers that are coming into your program will need during their time with you. Um,
Um, One thing that I think as parents, it's important to understand is sort of the different levels of emotional and behavioral reactions that a kid might experience or demonstrate at at camp, right? At camp, like big feelings are common. And what we want to know is what category they fall into, because that sort of gives us information about how we as parents should respond, but also how we'd like the camp to respond. Like to think of it as the sort of three levels. One is my child distressed, right? And distress is uncomfortable, but it can be adaptive, right? It's your nervous system reacting to something new. And we'll use homesickness because that's, I think, the clearest example. Um, so uh, so attachment theory, right, which talks about how do we know, what do secure bonds look like, and what are the outcomes of secure bonds between parents and children. One of the things we know actually is that securely attached children are actually those who might miss home even more intensely, because for them, connection really matters. By the way, those kids are also more likely to respond ultimately positively to support from other adults. But mild homesickness might look like, bedtime tears, temporary longing, saying I miss home, seeking a lot of reassurance from staff and counselors. But that same child is likely still actively participating in activities, is eating, is engaging socially. And when that child goes to the counselor and says, I'm really homesick and I'm sad, that child can often recover with some support. So that's distress. And anxiety at camp is also often part of a distress, especially at the beginning, right? In children, anxiety frequently presents somatically, right, through the body. So that's the stomach aches, the headaches, the nurse visits. So, Ethan, if he's struggling a little, if he's a little bit, he's sort of first few days of camp and he still hasn't figured out where he fits in, Ethan, let's say is our 8 and 9 year old boy, right? He's not going to go up to the counselor and say, I don't know where I fit in. What he is going to say is, my stomach hurts. And so that distress is uncomfortable, but it is developmentally normal, assuming that then we can support it properly. So that's distress. Dysregulation is, we're really talking about a nervous system that's overwhelmed. And it's more intense than distress. So this is a child who's more likely to have meltdowns. He's going to shut down. There might be minor, interactions, minor triggers that result in escalation and flooded crying that takes a lot of time to settle. In dysregulation, what's happening is that the child cannot soothe himself or self-regulate independently, but the child can return to baseline with adult support. And going back to, well, as what Jamie was saying, this is where scaffolding matters. This is where what the camp is able to provide matters. Do counselors know to sit beside this child? Do they know do they know how to help co-regulate the child? Do they know how to problem solve? Do they know how to help the child re-enter socially? Dysregulation requires intervention, but it doesn't automatically mean that the camp is not appropriate for the child. I will add, right, that counselors, what we're talking about here is that counselors have gotten some training in advance, and that what we really care about are the counselors also getting support with how to manage these situations. Right. So we want the mental health support and the well-being support to be focused on the children, but it actually also comes through the way in which staff is supported to support the children. So we've talked about distress, we've talked about dysregulation, and now I'm just going to say a word about impairment. And that's when the child is not functioning. This is not just about intensity, but this is also about duration and the fact that it really interferes with the child's ability to enjoy anything in camp. And this is a child who refuses to go to activities for a few days. We notice that this kid is having issues sleeping, either too much or too little, or with eating. This is sustained ongoing withdrawal from activities. And the key difference here is that this child cannot meaningfully participate in camp life. Again, this is a situation where we want to make sure that the camper care team, the mental health team, that they know that they escalate appropriately, that they're consulting with the appropriate professionals. This is when parents need to be partnering in real time. So again, just to review, right? So distress is this uncomfortable but adaptive reaction. Dysregulation requires scaffolding, and impairment is when requires a more consistent intervention. Right. So again, Ethan melts down after basketball. Let's actually do this again. Sorry, Ethan, right, cries at bedtime, but he's still going to his activities. He's a kid in distress, and through support, well, that's sort of what he needs, you know. But if he's melting down after basketball, and having a tantrum, we're going to call that dysregulation. And then if he refuses for days to, you know, go to any activities and doesn't recover despite any intervention, then that's impairment. And we as parents, the reason this matters is that if we mistake distress for danger, we might come in and rescue far too quickly. But if we mistake impairment for just normal adjustment, then we might under-respond. And a high-quality camp will be able to differentiate that carefully. And it's what ultimately will, you know, provide the child the camp experience that we want the child to have.
All right, we thought it would be fun just to hear from you for a moment and make it a little interactive. So if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat just, you know, one word or a short phrase, we're curious to know what your biggest concern is going into the summer. What are the categories that you're most worried about? Are they related to your child going to camp? Is it your child's experience, your experience? What is it that you're most worried about? We'd love to see that as we move through. We have some examples on the screen as well.
We have homesickness and supports for camp staff so far. And
And
while
I just like to mention as a day camp director for a lot of years, also separation anxiety is homesickness at a day camp. So if you're, you know, if your children are still at day camp, you can still experience that same same issue.
And while we're waiting for anything else to come in, it's Wendy. I just wanted to share anxiety just came up too. But I'm a longtime camp director. And the first year I sent my kid off to overnight camp, I was so nervous um, about my kid being painfully homesick, even though I know it's part of life and it's part of the challenge. And I did see a picture on day 3 of the whole group together and my kid wearing a hoodie when it was 90 degrees out in the back of the group staring to the left. And it was very painful for me, even as an experienced camp director. Um, okay, here's a couple other things. Level of impairment that requires a child leaving camp and camp safety, just the safe anxiety about the safetiness of camp.
I mean, I think naming your anxieties and the things that stress us out is very helpful, putting it out there and being able to have those conversations with your camp directors are very, very valuable. And, you know, if there's opportunity at the end, maybe there'll be some question and answer where we can help phrase some questions to help those conversations go smoothly. All right. So, um, why do kids have these reactions at camp, right? Why do we see these things at camp? And we know that we see these things because there are so many demands that are being stacked on top of each other at camp, right? There's this new environment, new surroundings that children and young staff are managing. This can cross over to how young staff are feeling at camp as well. New peers that they're interacting with, which is social pressures, living in close quarters, limited downtime. We talked about the physical fatigue of being at camp, the sun exposure, the constant activity. Just like if you went to the beach with your family for a day and enjoyed the sun for the day, it's a wonderful day, but at the end of the day, everybody's exhausted. And part of being exhausted means that your emotions run a little high, and your ability to stay balanced might be a little bit smaller. So those are things that kids feel at camp, and it gets compressed. Increased independence. That happens the first year at camp, and it happens every year at camp, right? Each year that kids return, they're expected to have more and more independence. It starts with simple independence about being able to manage your hygiene. That might be something like brushing your teeth, things like organizing and keeping track of your own things. Decision making when you go to the dining hall. Am I going to have the food that's presented to me, or am I going to have the substitute meal? All of those things are part of independence that kids are doing at camp without the scaffolding support that they're used to at home. And so they have different supports at camp. But that's part of what they're managing. And all of these things together can be a little bit challenging. And that's why we see these reactions at camp. It's important to remember that these reactions are stretches of development, and that is normal. It is normal to be in a little bit of discomfort. That is where the growth happens. It is not normal to be overwhelmed by them, right? And so we're trying to help counselors know the difference and parents know the difference between sitting in discomfort and being a little stretched, because that is where the growth happens, that growth mindset that we want and we do so well at camp. That understanding that sometimes these small little moments, they can feel really, really big in the moment. And we really want to help kids feel just a little bit reach beyond their comfort zone, right? Get just a little bit outside of that comfort zone. And we know that we can help them by simply changing the dialogue also, using things like, you can do it. I know that this activity makes you nervous. It made me nervous too the first time I tried it. And helping change the dialogue, which you can do at home with your children before they even go to camp. Help them have that growth mindset when they arrive. All right, and not your turn.
Yeah. Thank you, Jamie. Children who have pre-existing diagnoses or symptoms, and I think the common ones are anxiety or ADHD. We also see depression, and there are kids who've also lived through some kind of trauma. Sometimes parents wonder whether or not they should share that with the camp and whether or not camps can hold that and still support their child in the camp experience. And I think the answer to that is that camp can be profoundly growth building, but two things are essential. One, parents need to be communicating and disclosing to the camp. And then the second piece is, as a parent, you want to make sure that the camp has a clear protocol and plan, that either sort of a general protocol, but one that where they've worked with you and learning about what works for your child. Disclosure is not weakness. Disclosure is collaboration. And because when camps don't know what they're supporting, they can't scaffold your child effectively. And parents should never be sending their child to the sort of high demand environment without knowing exactly how support escalates, exactly how support can be provided. So in practice, let's look at, for instance, if a child has anxiety. I saw that someone put that in the chat, right? Anxious children are also going to feel anxious at camp, right? That's not necessarily the problem, right? The key question is, right, how do they how do they recover? How do they live with it? What kind of supports do they get? How can they still be enjoying camp, right? So if this is a camper who becomes overwhelmed, question is, who's noticing that? Who's going to evaluate whether or not there's some kind of intervention is needed? What are the interventions that are attempted? When our parents looped in. So again, that's why it's important for the parent to be talking to sharing with the camp, and why the camp needs to work with the parent and demonstrating that there is a plan. ADHD. That's another example of kids who have ADHD are coming to camp, and camp increases executive demands, right? Like suddenly there's a lot of transitioning. Child's arriving to camp, they've not been to camp, so everything is new, right? How do I get to, I go to the dining hall, and then I have to quickly go from there to swimming, and then from there I have to go to, archery, and these are all, constantly sort of starting and stopping and having to transition, and there's a lot of social interpretation that happens with people that, the child doesn't know. Camp can be amazing with lots and lots of activities and opportunities. So there's lots of opportunities for impulse control, and therefore impulse control problems, right? And then there's the sort of the fatigue management. So again, without disclosing that to a camp, right, that behavior, right, if there's trouble with transitions, if there's then, for instance, and that behavior might be misinterpreted as defiance, right? But with disclosure, behavior can be understood as regulation difficulty, and then it can be scaffolded accordingly. And as a parent, you want to know, how are transitions structured? How are social struggles interpreted? How are staff trained in executive function support? And yeah, camp is often not the moment necessarily to experiment with medication changes, but that is something that you need to be talking about with the camp in advance. So camp, symptoms matter and structure matters. And children with mental health histories, they can thrive at camp. As long as, not to repeat ourselves, right? But the camp knows what it's supporting, and how that support is going to be provided. Jamie.
Okay, so evaluating if camp, if the camp is the right fit, and what kind of mental health infrastructure is there. So choosing a camp is a really big thing, right? You're deciding who is going to take care of your children when you are not there, and who you're partnering with. And of course, it's my hope that you're choosing somebody you're going to partner with for many, many years, because there is something about tradition and being part of an environment for a period of time, not just one summer, regardless of the length of the program that you're choosing. And so there are practical factors that you're thinking about. You're thinking about the physical facility. You're thinking about activity options. Do you want a single purpose camp that is just a STEM camp or just an art camp? Or do you want a traditional camp? Do you want a session camp? Do you want what kind of different things do you need in that situation? Do you want a pool? Do you want a lake? Do you want co-ed? Do you want single gender? Do you want secular or religious? And all of those things matter. But what matters most is the emotional systems that are in place, that mental health infrastructure. And how do you as a parent know? How do you know what systems are in place? And so there are minimum standards to look for and minimum things to ask for. You want to understand, who supervises my children? What kind of counselors are they hiring? And what kind of chain of command do they have? You want to understand what kind of regular check-ins are happening. How are the counselors being proactive? You want to understand what kind of documentation is happening because you want to be looking for patterns. You want to know that counselors are looking for patterns. You want to know what kind of escalation is available. Do they have support teams in place, whether it's on camp, outside of camp? When is clinical staff brought in? When are parents notified? And you want to understand how they manage, what their protocols are for things such as homesickness and separation anxiety. How do they recognize if things are a moment, a pattern, or a crisis when your child is dealing with something, right? Is it just a moment that's passing? Is it an ongoing pattern? Or is it something that is an immediate crisis? So those are things that you can talk about. Red flags when you're talking to camp leadership, and red flags are red flags for camp fit, right? They might say, oh, it's just part of camp, or we don't see much of this. This helps you understand if the camp director and the team have systems in place that you feel are overreacting or underreacting to mental health situations that may or may not arise. So it just gives you some context when you ask these questions to put them within. Um, the most important thing is to think about who am I partnering with? Who is going to take care of my children when I am not there? Because you want to build that relationship from the very beginning so that you have that ongoing trust throughout the whole summer, whatever length you choose, because like we talked about for the first half of this presentation, growth happens at camp, which means that every child sits in some discomfort at some time. And so you want to trust that the leadership that you're choosing knows how to manage that discomfort successfully.
Absolutely. And then there's actually also what you can do on your end while your child is at camp and sitting with some distress. Um, One thing, children learn to regulate their emotions through relationships, right? They actually, especially long before children learn how to self-soothe, they borrow stability from regulated adults. Children's nervous systems actually calibrate in response to caregivers. And even though you're not physically there with your children, you should think about the fact that your emotional stance that it can travel. Going back to Ethan, if Ethan says, I want to go home, your response tone says a lot. We can imagine this as a conversation, but we can also think about, how are you responding? So if he says, I want to come home, if you sound alarmed, his brain hears, this is dangerous. I need to get out of here. If you sound steady, just your tone, he's more likely to hear this is hard, but perhaps survivable, right? So your tone communicates safety far faster than than your words do, actually. And regulation matters. One thing to think about is, of course, is that when your child is away, is that actually your attachment system is also disrupted. It's activated, right? Because you also now are losing visual reassurance of how is my child doing. You are losing direct control over your child. You don't have the immediate context in which things happen, right? I mean, and that uncertainty can create some anxiety. And when people are anxious, there are certain predictable thinking patterns that show up. So again, if you get a call or a letter from your child and he doesn't seem like he's, bubbling over with excitement, your immediate thoughts might be, oh my God, camp is going terribly, right? So you start catastrophizing. You start doing, some mind reading, right? Oh my God, no one likes him. And then the sort of personalization bit, which is like, I pushed him into something that he wasn't ready for. This is my fault. And it's important, you should notice those thoughts, but you should notice that you're having them. And before you act on them, maybe pause and then ask, okay, is what being communicated to me, is this distress or is this danger? And sort of think then, how should I respond accordingly, right? We have to remember that most early camp struggles are distress, and that distress often decreases with support and time, right? Like you start to find your friends, you start to figure out which adults are the ones that you're going to go to for support. So before there's how the camp responds to the child, but there's also how you respond and reach out to your child. And it's really important to regulate because that could impact your child's emotional state. So again, your child calls, says, I hate it here, right? Ethan calls home, says, I hate it here. Do you respond, do you want me to come get you and bring you home right away? I'm there, right? Because then you're unintentionally also signaling doubt in his ability. If you respond, wow, it sounds like, it sounds like this could be hard, and bedtime is often, right, the hardest part. What do you need to get through this? Then what you're doing is you're validating his experience. You're signaling confidence. And in a sense, your language is shaping his identity, which in this case would be one of, competence and strength. And these are the sort of the moments of growth. Now, of course, balance here is really important. We're not saying your child should be suffering because he needs to grow, right? What we are saying is that some distress builds resilience and allows for growth, but we are also saying that ongoing impairment requires action. So there are times. So of course, when interventions need to take place, they need to happen. We don't want to dismiss the struggle. We want to make sure it's supported and not endured alone. And then there are moments where we have to do much more.
Okay, communicating during camp. First and foremost, you really want to understand what your camp's communication policy is, and work with camp to follow that policy. You also want to make sure that you understand that you are seeing a piece, a fragment of the story. And sometimes it's very hard to take a snapshot and put together an entire picture. When children write letters home, you are often capturing a low moment of their time. Maybe they're tired or homesick. They're often writing letters home at rest hour or before bed. And those are downtime, quiet periods, as opposed to the times of the day where exciting things are happening and they're on the go. When you're looking at a photo, you're looking at a millisecond of the day. Just because your child isn't in the photo doesn't mean that they were in distress. Maybe they were in the bathroom, right? Wendy told you herself about a story that she felt. It's very hard to see a piece of the story. And then the phone call home often reflects just a moment. Sometimes just hearing a parent's voice invokes a sadness for a child and an uncertainty of, I really like camp, but I also miss home and I don't know how to act. And so those moments can be really, really challenging for parents. And Anat said something earlier that I loved so much, I wrote it down. And she said, the emotional, your emotional state can travel. And this is true, right? Kids can pick up on your emotional stance. They know how you're feeling, and it's really helpful. Although I know as a parent, it's so hard. It's really helpful if you can separate your emotion and how you're feeling from their experience. And some of that means that you can take a moment, take a beat, take a pause before you respond. Take a minute to say, before you start typing, before you answer the question, to make sure that you are thinking straight, and that you have a as full of a picture as possible. And then if you have more questions, call the camp and get clarity instead of putting together a story that may not be accurate. Get the full picture. Partner with them to get the full picture. And if I could give one other piece of advice, stay out of the spiral of the text chain drama. That is a new phenomenon. I am fortunate that that didn't exist when my kids went to camp. But, parents are creating more and more drama in these text chains amongst the group by putting in simple things. My daughter sounded sad on the call. Is your daughter sad? And they're creating anxiety and concern for everybody. So do your best to stay out of it. Maybe even go as far as to set it as something that doesn't come up every day on your phone, but that you only read once or twice a week so that they all come in at the same time, as opposed to the constant pinging of them.
Absolutely. Yes, people don't always know that or note that you can mute your conversation, the phone conversations. I mean, the chats, right? And that otherwise they can really get out of hand.
All right. I know we're short on time, so I'm going to try to plow through our next few slides here a little bit. When to elevate?
Well, first, we're just going to talk about preparing
Go
children
ahead. You
for
go
camp.
first.
I'll
Go
just do
ahead.
that. Yeah. Right. So one thing that's important, right? So we also, there's sort of what the camp can do. There's what you can do with the camp. And then there's also what you can do with your child before they go to camp. And I'll just, quickly, we'll just talk about the fact that one, set realistic expectations. If you are telling your kid camp is always fun, everyone's happy there, it's all unicorns and rainbows, the minute they have a hard moment, like the minute they miss a shot in archery or they have a lonely night, the child thinks the problem is me. Something is wrong with me, right? Because because you've told them that camp is amazing. So what you want to make sure is that you're telling kids that camp's amazing and there can be hard moments because we know that when people expect challenges, they persist longer and they're more likely to interpret it not as a personal failure or as a weakness. We want to talk to our kids about maybe sort of help plan with them. What is camp? Of course, you can't totally do it until you get there, right, for the child, but like, what are some of the, challenges going to be? Who's going to help remind you to brush your hair? How, what about brushing your teeth? The sleep arrangements might look like this. Let me tell you about some of the challenges in getting food at the dining hall. It's only the first day, it's going to be something you don't know, but after that, it's gonna seem like like you've been doing this your whole life. And then equipping the child with some skills, like how do you ask adults for help, taking space, knowing when to ask for it. So that is some things you can do in advance with your child.
So when to elevate concerns. Counselors are looking for markers, right? They're looking for intensity, they're looking for duration, and they're looking for impairment. So those are the times where they are going to elevate those things. And if you see those things that you're getting in letters or phone calls, you're looking for those patterns as well. Persistent withdrawal from activities, ongoing disruption of sleep, ongoing disruption of eating, any sign of hopelessness, of course. Those are the kinds of things that we're looking for at camp. Anybody can have one hard night of adjustment, one hard day of activity. Camp is looking for multiple days of decline. And so what that means for you is that any child can write one letter home, or maybe even two, while they've had a bad moment. You're looking for a pattern. You're looking for multiple. You're looking for the intensity and the duration in those letters, in that communication that you're getting. And, we've talked a lot about the child's experience. The parent's experience is important as well. And we want to recognize that. Not mentioned earlier that parents are losing the direct control that they have had and the immediate contact with their children. And again, that happens even at a day camp in those couple of hours that your child is away from you. And of course, at an overnight camp, whether it's for a couple of days or a couple of weeks. And when that happens, parents lose that, some things that they are accustomed to, and they can kind of feel lost a little bit, right? And it's not weakness when you feel lost. This is normal. And you may have a desire to check those photographs on refresh. And you may have some anxiety or nervousness that spikes, and you may feel a little empty because your pattern and your rhythm has changed. Your house is quiet, your routine is different. Right, you're at home without your children. Maybe it's the first time you don't have lunches to pack and you have nobody to drive, and your bedtime routine is different. We spend so much time talking about the children's bedtime routine. Your bedtime routine is totally different. Um, and so think about how you can embrace this time, what you can do to set yourself up for more success, and to recognize that the discomfort that children sit in that equals growth, there's also discomfort that you're going to sit in that's going to equal growth for your child. Uh, so part of it means helping yourself um, cope, right? We need healthy coping for parents. And that is difficult when your child is in distress. And so we want to take a moment to talk about helping to cope when your child is in distress and helping to cope when you are in distress. And it's important to remember that your job is to respond, not react to your child's distress. You don't have to hold their pain. You just need to react, to respond to it. So take a moment to zoom out. Take a moment to breathe, to pause, to think about how you're responding. Because again, your response, how you feel, how you react, they are responding. Your child is picking up on. And if you are in distress, you want to do the things that you need to do to maintain your own regulation and be intentional and be purposeful about that.
Okay. Um, So, in conclusion, I think I want to go back just to Ethan and say, we have Ethan, he's a super excited kid. And what you really want at the end of camp is that he says there were moments that were challenging and I overcame them and I grew and I had so much fun water skiing and learning how to swim, right? So camp at its best is fun, real fun, friendships, pride, independence, and it's a stretch. And when camps prioritize emotional infrastructure, and when parents partner thoughtfully with the camp, then children can really expand beyond what feels comfortable, and they discover what they're capable of, and they have a fun summer, and that is camp at its best. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you both. I love camp and I really appreciate everything that you shared. And the struggle is real. It's real. It's real for kids and it's real for parents. And I'm so grateful for these tidbits and tips. We have one question that popped in. If you have another question, you're welcome to throw it in the chat. But the one question was, is it okay to say to your camper, your child, that if they are not happy at camp, we'll come get you? What do you think?
Do you
Jamie,
want me to take it
yeah,
first
I
or
was
do
gonna
you
say,
want
Jamie,
to?
why don't you take it? Yeah.
Sure. So, I like to tell parents to first talk to the camp director and get the language that the camp director would like them to use so that they could be consistent. Um, I do not like when parents suggest that they will take their child home, because we all know that when push comes to shove, you are going to take your child home if they need to go home. But telling your child that up front lets them know that A, you don't really trust the camp that you've chosen, and B, you might not believe that they have all the skills in place to be successful at camp. And it makes you feel better as a parent, but it doesn't give your child the tools that they need for success. So I think it's helpful to talk to the camp and say, what language do you want me to use? Because I'm struggling. I want my child to know that I love them and that I'm going to take them home, which of course you do. Um, and I want to set them up for success. And so I need the language to set them up for success this summer. And I need the camp to back me up on that so that they can be in partnership together.
So, Jamie, just to piggyback on that, it prior to camp, if your kid is worried, before they even get there, like they're signing up and, prior, would you shift that answer at all or keep it basically the same?
So I think prior to camp, I think one of the things that parents need to talk to kids about before camp is that camp is a place of growth and that it has wonderful moments, but it also has moments that can be challenging. And parents often want their kids to be so excited about camp that they don't talk about the difficult moments. And so then they get to camp and it's shocking that they miss home and it's shocking that it's difficult to make a friend. So if they talk about those moments and they say, I understand you might want to come home because it's going to be hard that first day when you arrive at camp. And let me talk to you about what that might look like so you know what to expect. Set them up for success by turning those moments that are nerve-wracking when you do something new into what to actually realistically expect instead of it all being rah-rah fantastic, being real moments of growth.
Yeah, I like to think of it also as find something that the child has already mastered and talk through what was it like at the beginning, the first time that if you have a kid who's a swimmer, when the first time that you swam, you did not know how to swim, right? There were hard times in that process. And at the same time, you were able to find there was something about it, right, that you enjoyed that kept you going and trying and pursuing it. So the idea that like we don't there's very little in life that we maybe other than Disney World, right? Like there's very little a day at Disney World with your parents, right? There's very little that in life that doesn't take a little bit of adjustment before we appreciate how great it is.
Awesome. Well, it is 12:59. We're a very timely group, and I want to thank both Jamie and Anat for all the tips and tools to help kids and ourselves get through camp. I threw in the chat a short survey. It takes about 30 seconds to a minute to fill out. We would love your feedback on whether or not we hit the mark so we can report back to our funders and just do better. Our next Feed Your Mind with No Shame on You is next month, Wednesday, March 18th. It is help. Once a week therapy isn't enough for my child. What do I do? And so that is in partnership with a wonderful org here called Clarity Clinic. And we are going to be speaking to the clinical director. She's going to be sharing what options are out there if once a week therapy is just not cutting it for your young person. And in the meantime, we will see you soon. Thank you for coming. And we'll just hang on here for a moment if anyone wants to chat in the virtual lobby. And if not, we'll see you next time and have the best summer. Thanks, everyone.